do the things together only lovers do. Let love flow on, baby. Let's do the things together only lovers do. Let love flow on, baby.
A very good afternoon to our brothers and sisters, whoever you're watching us from. This is Beyond the Newsroom, our YouTube channel. Yeewaayo okukuweereza mu mbeera zonna. Wetuli omukulembeze Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu agenda kubeera ng'ayogerako ko gye tuli. Mukadde akatali kawala nnyo, wabula nga yo summit yatandise dda era aboogera baatandise dda okuba nga boogera, era tugenzeeko ko mu luwummula, and we gonna be back very soon, so just keep on watching, because His Excellency Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu he's gonna speak at around 50 minutes past 3, so keep on waiting. He's coming. Let us wait for his message. We don't know what next for him, and anyway, what is he gonna tell us? Nobody knows, but anyway, let's keep on waiting. And other speakers like Vadim Abdullahim Al Saddam, Ekap Esati, then n'abalala bangi bagenda kwogera, Pastor Nguyeni Trangton, then Noj Mohammadi, Vailan China wavayo Ding Jing, oyo naye ajja kubanga ayogera, so kwoteka Flex Navarro, oyo yava Cuba, Ihma Toti, oyo ye Uruguay, kwoteka Raif Badawi okuva Saudi Arabia, then kwoteka Zango Bonching okuva China, bonna bagenda kubanga boogera, so let's keep on waiting. Ate summit esobola okubanga eddamu okubanga ate kyogera. Anyway, wano ffe twasalawo okubanga tukuweereza era osobola oteekako n'obubaka bwo wansi mu comment section, then tusobola okubanga tubiyitamu mpolampola. Ngenda kukolamuko katini nnyo bwenti, then nsobola okubaleka ate nga bwe tulinda tusobole okubanga ensonga zonna tuzitambuliza ddala maridadi kabisa namna hivyo. Kale mbataddemuko katini naye tubeerewo tusobole okubanga tugoberera ebigambo by'omukulembeze Robert Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Mitembo.
seeing across Iran is not just a series of isolated protests, it is a nationwide movement.
Communication networks going down.
Blackout now, one of the largest internet shutdowns in history.
Freedom, it's not about one thing.
Freedom is to conquer the darkness.
The Islamic Republic can take our eyes, can take our body, can take our life, but not our hope.
Freedom is hope.
Freedom is dignity. It's humanity. It's what makes us personal.
Freedom is courage.
I believe that we are asked to take courage and speak truth.
You speaking truth?
They're scared of me because I'm telling the truth.
But most of all, it's peace.
The path to peace in Europe goes through freedom in Belarus,
In Russia,
In China,
in North
Korea,
in Afghanistan,
In Iran,
in Venezuela.
in Sudan.
Because that's what we should stand for.
Es una obligación moral.
Freedom is a universal human yearning. For that reason, it will always prevail.
We can rise up.
we have to fight, all of us.
We are together in this fight.
We are in this together.
The darkness will be gone.
The evil will fall,
The light will come back.
and the beautiful future will come.
It's impossible any other way.
Please welcome Harel Neuer, Executive Director of United Nations Watch.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome to the 18th Annual Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy. This year's theme is simple and urgent: unite against tyranny, rise for freedom. Next week, right across the street from here, the United Nations will open its annual session of the Human Rights Council. Members will include regimes such as Qatar, Cuba, Egypt, Pakistan, and Vietnam and Iraq. Regimes that jail journalists, crush women, torture dissidents, and erase minorities will sit as judges of the world on human rights. We are here first. We are here to restore moral clarity. We're here to give the microphone not to the regimes, but to those they persecute, those who have the courage to rise up against them in the name of freedom, democracy, and human dignity. Let us begin with Hong Kong. Beijing had promised autonomy. Instead, it delivered arrests, repression, and exile. It imposed the infamous national security law. Dissent became a crime. They tried to extinguish democracy, but Chloe Chung joined the democracy movement at age 14. Today, at just 20 years old, she lives in exile with the Chinese authorities placing a bounty on her head of 1 million Hong Kong dollars. Imagine a superpower hunting a young student. But in Chloe, we see a campaign, but Chloe continues to campaign for political prisoners and to expose transnational repression that targets Hong Kongers all over the world. From Hong Kong to Vietnam, we have Hue Nu, teacher in public school for many years, for the crime of peacefully protesting corruption. She was abducted, assaulted, and sentenced to 39 months in prison. When regimes fear teachers, my friends, corruption runs deep. Today, she speaks for prisoners who cannot. Vietnam will be sitting at the Human Rights Council next week, but here we hear from the dissidents. In Zimbabwe, the journalist, Blessed Mulanga, reported on corruption and political dissent for the crime of covering a press conference that was critical of the president. He was charged with incitement to violence, detained for 73 days, denied bail 3 times. We were told things would get better after the dictator Mugabe, but we see the opposite is true. The authoritarianism is only getting worse. From Zimbabwe, we move to the most closed dictatorship on earth, North Korea. Kim Yu-mi grew up in a coastal military zone under relentless surveillance and propaganda. In 2023, she and 8 members of her family escaped by boat in middle of the night. Now living in Seoul in South Korea, she works to expose the truth about life inside the regime to fight for the freedom of her people. Now in Venezuela, we know that it's a country that forced some 7-8 million people to flee. First Chavez, then Maduro destroyed the country and persecuted anyone who spoke out. Leopoldo Lopez, former mayor and opposition leader, was sentenced to 14 years in prison after he led peaceful protests. He had to endure 4 years in a military prison, solitary confinement, a year and a half in house arrest, another year and a half sheltering in the Spanish embassy in Caracas, eventually escaping into exile. Today, Leopoldo works to unite democratic movements worldwide through the World Liberty Congress. Now, recently, we were all inspired to see the Nobel Peace Prize going to Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Senior advisor is with us here today, Pedro Uruturtu, came for him under false charges. He had to take shelter, was trapped for over 400 days inside the Argentinian embassy in Caracas under siege conditions, constant surveillance by political police. Yet from inside the embassy, he continued coordinating international diplomacy for the democratic opposition. Dictators may control territory, but Democrats build alliances. Now in Sudan, we've had killings, tens of thousands of people killed, millions starving today. No one is speaking about Sudan, sadly, at the United Nations. It's being ignored, but we're going to hear from Mutassim Ali, one of the leading human rights activists from Sudan. He founded a grassroots student movement who opposed the regime's persecution, the genocide of the people in Darfur. He was imprisoned in Sudan 3 times, endured severe torture, and was forced into exile. Today, Mutassim Ali is a legal scholar. As war devastates the country once again, he demands accountability. Now in Afghanistan, Taliban continue to erase the faces and the voices of women. But with us here today is Marzia Hamidi. She is an Afghan Taekwondo athlete who fled Kabul after the Taliban takeover, now trains in France, but she's a fighter not only in the ring, but against the Taliban persecution and bigotry against women. Because of death threats, she has to live under 24/7 police protection. Through sports and advocacy, she stands for every girl who's told she must disappear. And she will be receiving today our 2026 International Women's Rights Award. This afternoon, we're going to welcome Svitlana Tsikhanouskaya. She entered politics some 6 years ago after her husband, Sergei, was arrested for announcing his candidacy. She was dismissed as a housewife by the dictator, Lukashenko, yet she united the opposition in the election of 2020, inspired the largest peaceful protest movement in Belarus, and according to all independent observers, she won the election. Of course, the results were stolen by Lukashenko, who went into exile, and today leads the democratic opposition. Again, autocrats may cling to force, but democratic leaders build institutions. Now, from Syria, a country that was destroyed since the past decade and a half, the Kurdish people need to be heard. They've been targeted in horrible ways in the past few months under the supposedly improved Syrian leader. We're going to hear from Aram Akil. In 2014, while he documented crimes of ISIS, he was taken hostage and held for 280 days. After his release, he did not retreat. He became a leading voice defending Kurdish minority rights and other minorities and combating extremism. He survived terror. He now confronts it with his testimony. China is a member of the Human Rights Council, will be taking the floor next week. Yet, when it comes to religious freedom, they crush Tibetan temples and they crush any independent Christian churches that do not belong to the regime. Pastor Ezra Jin, founder of one of China's largest underground churches, a church that doesn't answer to the state but to a higher power, inspired fear in the regime, and they took him away in October. He and 27 other church leaders were detained, and we're going to hear from his daughter, Grace Jin Drexel, who's here to fight for her father's freedom and the freedom of all people in China. 1.5 billion people denied any basic freedoms. Cuba is a member of the Human Rights Council. Cuba is a police state. We're going to hear from a playwright, organized peaceful protests, Junior Garcia Aguilera. Before a planned march for political change, his home was surrounded for hours by the paramilitary and Communist Party officials. He was prevented from leaving. Eventually, he managed to escape and go into exile. The Havana regime fears artists. When dictators are afraid of poetry, it means the foundations of their regime are already cracking. Now, Russia is very much on the agenda here in Europe. You may remember, shortly after the invasion by Putin of Ukraine in March 2022, we saw this incredible scene on Russian state TV. A woman jumped onto the studio as news was being broadcast with a sign, and the sign read, "No war. Don't believe the propaganda. They're lying to you." For 6 seconds of truth, Marina Ovsyannikova was arrested, placed under house arrest, managed to escape, was sentenced in absentia to 8.5 years in prison. Just 6 seconds of her courageous act shattered years of propaganda. She'll be with us here today. And finally, Iran. This week, sadly, as you know, here in Geneva, Iranian regime officials are walking around as if they're respected diplomats. Bas Aragchi was there at the United Nations. I was there yesterday with our dissidents. He was walking around being hosted by the Red Cross and the IAEA and the UN Conference on Disarmament. And in another room at the United Nations across the street was Afsaneh Nadipur, a longtime regime official who was an ambassador of Iran regime, who defended their crackdown against women. She's now a new member this week of the United Nations Human Rights Council expert body, the advisory committee, which deals with gender-based violence. So an expert on women's rights is sitting at the United Nations, so-called expert, who is a defender of the persecution of women. And she's this week an expert at the UN. And next week is going to be another deputy foreign minister, regime official, addressing the Human Rights Council. So this is what's happening at the United Nations. But we here have brought one of the leading dissidents, someone who was on stage here more than a decade ago when she inspired the women's freedom movement of Iran with millions of followers. Her name is Masih Alinejad. And because of her activism to inspire women to demand their rights in Iran, which eventually inspired the 2022 Women Life Freedom movement, the regime is trying to kill her. She lives now in exile in New York. The regime sent multiple criminals, mobsters, to assassinate her. I was at the trial last year of one of the assassins that tried to kill her. They tried to kidnap her, and yet she continues and perseveres to speak for the people of Iran. And we're honored that today we're going to give the 2026 Courage Award to the heroes of Iran, and Masih Alinejad will be here to receive it on their behalf and to speak for the true voices in Iran. Now, the regime may have oil wealth, it has militias, prisons, but the people have courage. And history teaches us which in the end endures. So, ladies and gentlemen, please look at the people that will today come on the stage from Hong Kong and Vietnam, Zimbabwe, North Korea, Venezuela, Sudan, Afghanistan, Belarus, Syria, China, Cuba, Russia. Different continents, different cultures, but one shared conviction. Freedom is not granted by dictators. It is claimed by the brave, by the courageous, the dissidents you'll see today. The regimes across the street at the United Nations may hold the gavels, but they do not hold the moral authority, the moral inspiration, the moral clarity fills this room today. Tyranny depends on silence. This summit, the Geneva summit, is the opposite of silence. Today we say, unite against tyranny, rise for freedom. Thank you.
You hear chanting, "Fight for freedom! Stand with Hong Kong!" The sound echoes through the street, thousands of voices rising together. Then suddenly, a sharp bang, then another. The sky fills with smoke, tear gas. Your eyes burn, your throat closes. You taste chemicals in the air. Your chest tightens. Instinct takes over. Run. Everyone's running, but no one knows where to run. You hear coughing, screaming. Someone shouts for water. Someone falls. A young girl is crying, her hands shaking as she tries to pull on the mask. Rubber bullets crack through the air. The sound is sharp, unnatural, terrifying. This is not a theater performance. This was my home. This was Hong Kong in 2019. I was only 14 years old at my first protest in Hong Kong. I remember wearing my school uniform and going with my friends at an age intended for jokes, unfinished homeworks, and the luxurious ignorance of how the world truly works. That summer didn't politicize us, it conscripted us. We marched because our government proposed an extradition bill that would permit the transfer of Hong Kong citizens to mainland China for trial, into a judicial system answerable not to law, but to the whims of the Chinese Communist Party. A system where verdicts are known before a trial even begun. A place where dissidence is dangerous. We understood, even at 14, what that meant. We had to stand up for our home, not as radicals, but as citizens, or at least as children attempting to defend the future in which we were supposed to become a citizen. More than 1 million people marched peacefully, then 2 million, one of the largest pro-democracy movement in modern history. And the response was police brutality. The authorities called us rioters, cockroaches, street rats. They arrested everyone they could. Students, teachers, journalists, anyone who stood for freedom, and threw them in prison. If you opposed the government, they would arrest you and destroy you. Then came 2020. While the world was distracted by a pandemic, China imposed the national security law on Hong Kong and criminalized 4 things: secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. The Chinese Communist Party purposely left the interpretation of national security law vague, so anything could now become a crime. Protest became a crime. Speech became a crime. Thought became a crime. I had a choice to make: stay silent, stay and risk going to prison, or leave. I chose exile. My rationale? At least outside of Hong Kong, I would still have a voice. But exile isn't freedom. It's waking up every morning knowing that your friends are still in prison. It's checking your phone afraid that they will arrest someone you know. It's worrying that you will never go home again. I exiled myself to the United Kingdom, where hundreds and thousands of Hong Kongers also now live. And I've taken up advocacy work. I speak up for Hong Kongers in British Parliament. I call for the release of political prisoners. I call for sanctions and accountability. Doing this work makes the guilt bearable. Well, at least I'm doing something. But 2 years ago, on Christmas Eve, the Hong Kong authorities placed a 1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on my head. That's roughly 130,000 US dollar. I was just 19 years old. They put my face on a wanted poster and stuck it all over the train station, the airports, police stations, and declared me a fugitive. Since then, I've been followed, harassed, intimidated, threatened in the United Kingdom. Many friends have cut me off out of fear of retaliation. And it's not just me. This is my friend Anna Kwok. She is also in exile. She also has a bounty on her head, escaped it to America and continue her advocacy. And this is her father. Last week, he was convicted in Hong Kong, not because of anything he did, but because who his daughter is. He did not organize protests. He did not lobby foreign governments. He did not give speeches like this. He is just a father. The message is, if we can't silence you, we will hurt the people you love. And that is Jimmy Lai, an entrepreneur, founder of Apple Daily, Hong Kong's biggest pro-democracy media outlet. He built it because he believed Hong Kong deserves a free press. For that belief, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison at the age of 78, and that is effectively a death sentence. When people see headlines about Hong Kong, they sometimes imagine brave, untouchable activists, but the truth is much simpler. We are human. We feel fear, we feel guilt, we feel homesick, we cry. We are ordinary people put in extraordinary circumstances. Today, nearly 1,000 political prisoners remain behind bars in Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party wants you to forget them. They want you to issue a blunt statement, shake your hand, sign a trade deal, and move on. In just 5 years, China has destroyed Hong Kong. There is no more free press. There is no more freedom of assembly. There is no more right to protest. Everything can be a crime. Hong Kong is now one of the world's center for international money laundering and sanctions evasion, supporting the trade of illicit weapons to Russia, Iran, and North Korea. So tonight, I ask you, as diplomats, as politicians, as journalists, as students, don't look away from what China has done. Stand with the people of Hong Kong. Demand the release of Jimmy Lai. Demand the release of Anna Kwok's father. Demand the release of every student, journalist, and average Hong Konger who had the guts to stand against the authorities. Because if freedom only matters when it's convenient, it doesn't matter at all. Stand with Hong Kong. Stand with freedom and democracy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the next speech, interpretation is available in English and French. Headphones can be found on the tables or next to the chairs. Please select your preferred language. Channel 1 for English, Channel 2 for French. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I would like to share a story. Not the story of a politician, not the story of a leader, but the story of an ordinary person, a Vietnamese woman whose name is Dang Thi Huệ, nicknamed Huệ Như. I used to be a primary school teacher working in the school library, surrounded by books and children. My life was peaceful with family and job. I didn't start my life with the ambition to become a human rights activist, nor did I see confrontation with the Vietnamese communist state. I started my life in a family where both parents were members of the Communist Party. I was a teacher who was loyal to the regime, completely trusted the leadership of the Vietnamese Communist Party, and knew nothing about Vietnamese society. Full of injustice, wrongful suffering for the people, and rampant corruption. My life unexpectedly changed when I witnessed the injustices related to BOT, built opera transfer toll stations that were improperly located, with toll collection periods expiring, where businesses still relied on the state, causing burdens and losses to the people. Our activist group calls this dirty BOT. The main issue here was people pay taxes to the state to build roads, but once the roads were completed, the state hands them over to private businesses to set up these toll stations. The state is appropriating people's money, and people have to pay taxes and fees 3 times for a single road. The amount isn't huge, but it accumulates quickly each time they drive on the road. For example, a round trip for my small 5-seater car costs 70,000 Vietnamese dong, equivalent to 1/3 of my daily wage. Thus, 1/3 of my daily wage goes to the BOT, while I still have to pay taxes to the state and road maintenance fees that are directly deducted from the vehicle owner's account. The toll booths were all located on single-lane roads, leaving no other option but to pass through and pay. After gathering numerous documents, I realized that this injustice occurred not only in one locality, but in 127 BOT projects across Vietnam, all in violation of regulations. We began publicly exposing this problem on social media and received profound attention from the people nationwide. The people began to strongly protest, forcing the communist authorities to dismantle 4 corrupt BOTs to appease the situation. I recorded, live streamed, and asked questions publicly. I did not call for violence. I did not incite hatred. I only demand transparency and accountability. But in Vietnam, where the Communist Party holds absolute power, they don't allow citizens to question authority. My frequent critique and demands for transparency have become a crime. I'm being monitored. I'm being summoned for questioning. I'm being interrogated constantly. In June 2018, I started protesting against BOT projects. In September 2018, I was abducted by security forces in Thai Binh while I was walking and forced to delete my Facebook account. In May 2019, 5 plainclothes security officers from Hanoi abducted me in the middle of the street. They dragged me to the headquarters of a corrupt BOT project, gagged me, and beat me. After being released, my friends had to take me back to Thai Binh to be hospitalized. Doctors had to perform surgery immediately afterward because I had suffered a miscarriage. I was 8 weeks pregnant at the time. There was a deep pain and trauma that has lasted until today. I lost my child not because of fate, because of the systematic repression of the Communist Party of Vietnam. But it did not stop there. In June 2019, Hanoi police arrested me during a public peaceful protest at a toll booth in Hanoi. They towed away my car and confiscated my phone. In October 2019, Hanoi police prosecuted and detained me and sentenced me to 39 months in prison on charges of disturbing public order. During the trial, 4 lawyers defended me, but the court did not allow me or my lawyers to speak. The trial was open to the public, but hundreds of police officers were deployed to prevent my family, friends, and supporters from attending. They jammed the cell phone signals throughout the entire courtroom area. The court imposed a sentence that was unconstitutional, a sentence that not only deprived me of my personal freedom, but also sent a broader message. Citizens are forbidden from speaking out. In prison, I became a witness to things that the outside world could not see. Harsh detention conditions to punitive treatment. I tenaciously continued my struggle to improve the extremely harsh conditions of the communist prison system for prisoners. Prison guards embezzled provisions. Prisoners were treated as labor tools, exploited in a toxic environment, given reduced rations, served rotten, moldy food, and forced to buy canteen food at inflated prices. I myself was forbidden from seeing my family and was not allowed to receive items sent by my family to the prison. I had to rely on other prisoners for food, clothing, and daily necessities. I will always remember the stories from prison. Faces, forgotten cries. Upon my release, I continued to speak out and take risks. I recounted what I witnessed in prison on YouTube and Facebook, exposing the corrupt system. My live streams attracted millions of viewers across all social media platforms. I recorded up to 100 million views in a single month. I support the families of other prisoners of conscience. I travel to every prison in Vietnam to inspire other prisoners of conscience who are still being held captive. Security forces throughout Vietnam have been relentlessly pursuing me. My friends who spoke out with me have also been implicated. The most severely affected was detained. I'm not afraid. I continue to speak the truth. They listen to me as if I were their very breath. They see the injustices inflicted upon them by the communist authorities, and they begin to seek me out to speak out about their own grievances. I have also joined many Vietnamese workers who have been oppressed by their employers, facing wage cuts, increased work hours, lack of insurance coverage, and inadequate working conditions. For example, the large strike by Viet Glory workers in the Dien Châu district, Nghệ An province, resulted in 12 workers summoned by security forces who have faced potential prosecution. We went to the site to investigate, provide legal advice to them. The consequences were I was released from prison in January 2023. In May 2023, I was kidnapped for the first time. In May 2024, I was kidnapped for the second time. This time, 6 security officers from Thai Binh abducted me in the middle of the road right after I got off a bus from Hanoi to Thai Binh. They confiscated 5,000 USD from my bag and detained me for 24 hours without any detention order. After finding no evidence to incriminate us, they released me and continued to abduct my friends to force them to sign statements claiming they were lured by me on social media so they would have a pretext to detain me again. After being released for 15 days, the end of May 2024, security forces in Thai Binh surrounded me in the dark of the night. This time, I climbed over the roof to escape. In June 2024, I was forced to cross the border by land into Thailand, where I was granted emergency refugee status by the UNHCR. In Thailand, I continued my activities. I exposed government collusion projects with businesses that destroyed the sea, such as the one in Gonsan, Namden, where thousands of hectares of mangrove forests were filled with sand to build a steel plant that discharged waste into the sea. Security forces in Vietnam took my 11-year-old son to the commune's People's Committee office to question him about his mother's whereabouts, causing him extreme distress. Many human rights organizations protested on my behalf at the time. In June 2025, the Federal Republic of Germany accepted me under their humanitarian policy. When I reported to the Immigration Detention Center in Thailand for relocation, I was again approached by 10 Vietnamese security officers under the pretext of persuading me to return home, but in reality, they wanted to force me back to Vietnam to face trial. In Germany, I continue my human rights activism at the international level. I don't consider myself a hero. I'm proof of something very simple. I'm an ordinary person, courageous enough to speak the truth. In October 2025, the Security Investigation Agency of Hung Yên Province initiated legal proceedings and issued an arrest warrant, even requested an Interpol arrest warrant from me. 12 police officers raided my parents' house in my hometown, read out a search warrant, confiscated our family's private cameras, and installed new cameras to monitor our family's activities in our hometown. Communist authorities sent a report to Meta to block all my Facebook accounts in Vietnam. YouTube also sent a notification to delete my channel. In addition to all this state repression, I'm facing transnational lawsuits from Vietnam's #1 billionaire, Pham Nhat Vuong, and the giant Vingroup Corporation. They are suing me in Germany as an attempt to silence me for reporting on the products that are harming the consumers. This is a billionaire with connections to high-ranking officials of the Vietnamese Communist Party, aiding and abetting corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights has a face, a name, a story. Today, one of those faces is me, Huyen Như. I'm telling my own story, a victim of dictatorship, and my wish is not to be silenced. Because when someone is forced into exile simply for speaking out, it's not just a failure of a nation, but a test of the conscience of the international community. Thank you for listening.
Riding on protocol that has already been observed. I'm a journalist. I don't understand protocol that much. Today I appear before you wearing clothes that I have worn for 73 days in pre-trial detention. This, ladies and gentlemen, was my uniform as I suffered crimes of journalism. That was my prison number in D class section, which is kept the most dangerous criminals. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what repression looks like in Zimbabwe today. In the past, it was violence on the streets, abductions, and forced disappearances. Now, it's violence committed using the legal system. I call it lawfare. As journalist of 25 years, I've reported on Zimbabwe's democratic regression into a sophisticated authoritarian state. It was never always like this. Growing up, I idolized the president, the late Robert Gabriel Mugabe. My dad was a military veteran. He had fought in the War of Liberation to liberate our country from white colonial rule and was a proud member of the ruling ZANU-PF party. So are some of his brothers today, who were also part of the war. We lived comfortably, as he was a soldier at that time. But then, when I was in high school, he got sick. He needed medication. But our government hospitals were dry. There was no medication. For 6 months, I watched him deteriorate. And when he died, I started asking questions like, why was our life such a mess? Yet and my father fought for our country. And did we not have enough mineral resources and taxes to provide for the sick? Especially when government top officials drive top of the range vehicles, drink expensive whiskey, and dine in top hotels at our expenses and on our taxes. Ladies and gentlemen, once you start asking those questions, you cannot unask them. And I could not unsee the corruption of a government that treats public interest journalism as a security threat. So I became a journalist, reporting on stories others dared not to touch. I became the face of unmolested truth and journalism, the face of Heart and Soul TV and broadcasting, where I host a show called The Free Talk. We give dissenting voices a platform, tackle corruption, and we actually ultimately broke the government's monopoly in broadcast television using multimedia means. So perhaps it came as, as no surprise to me why I was deemed a political threat and eventually arrested. In February 25, police came to my office with guns to arrest me, a mere man of pen, paper, and words. Fortunately for me, unfortunately for them, I was in Zambia working on a documentary. So when they could not arrest me, they posted a statement on Elon Musk's X asking the public to help in my arrest. I read this post, voluntarily flew back home, handed myself to the police voluntarily, but dear friends, they still arrested me. This was against advice from my friends, my family, my colleagues, and especially my daughter, Lorraine Ruby Mshlanga, who advised me not to return to Zimbabwe, but instead to lie low in South Africa until the situation cooled down. Like them, I knew what would happen. The state has been very consistent on how it plays its hand. They arrest opponents, punish them through pre-trial detention, and release them months later. You might be acquitted, but you would have been punished. That's what they did to opposition leader Job Scala and journalist Hopo Chingono, who spent 2 years and 80 days in prison, respectively. They were eventually acquitted, but they had been punished. They had served a pre-trial sentence. I decided to go home regardless. But with hindsight today, the horror and the hell that I faced in Zimbabwe's prisons, I wish I had taken the advice to flee. But here is the thing. I was arrested for a broadcast.
democracy. And let me be clear about this, because some people might think that this has to do with ideology. It has nothing to do with ideology. You have the theocrats from Iran, couldn't be as conservative as it gets. You have the nationalists of Russia and the communists of China. So it is not ideology. It's all about a common enemy. That common enemy is democracy. That common enemy is the people from their countries. That common enemy is human rights. And that's why they collaborate. That's why they join efforts. And we have seen this for years under the eyes of the entire world. I have been here in Geneva invited by a UN Watch when Venezuela has come to the stage to present the reports. And I have seen with my own eyes and heard with my ears how the representatives from Iran, from Russia, from China, from Zimbabwe, from Uganda, from Eritrea, from Hong Kong, from any other places, they stand up and they pretend to support these regimes. So we come here to Geneva once and again, and we won't stop coming. But we can say that every time we come, we are frustrated just to see how the complacency amongst regimes blocks the system against the people. So we have seen how now in Venezuela, there is clearly a moment of change, as I said before. But we are seeing that possibility also in Iran.
Yeah, we want to see Ali Khamenei to be captured like Maduro.
Yes. And I might say that I am sure that the same way it happened in Venezuela, that 80% of the people supported the capture of the criminal Nicolas Maduro. The same way the people from Iran will celebrate in the streets the capture of those who have been killing them.
But actually, we want them to be removed, like Qasem Soleimani. I mean, I know you have questions, but I want to add something to what my brother, I always call Leopoldo my brother, and many other dissident activists mention these days, the collaboration between dictators.
Yes.
That hurts us a lot when we see that how dictators are more united than freedom fighters. And it is beyond sad that you walk in Europe, in America, everywhere, in free world, that you see, they see this as like political fight and saying that, this is a right wing issue, this is a left wing issue. Believe me, if the regime in Iran want to kill you, want to kill some of you, they never ask you whether you're left or liberal. They never ask you whether you're right wing or you support President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, or you support President Biden or Obama. They don't care. They hate democracy, as my brother said. They hate Western values. This is what bring all the dictators together. And I want to give you an example, personal story. I was walking in the street in New York after giving voice to voiceless people in Iran, going to Fox News and CNN. So one of the American old man, very nice, hugged me and said that I support you, but please don't go to Fox News. They're using you. They're not your friends. Yeah, wait. One block later, only one block later, another man stopped me, supported me, showed solidarity, and said, CNN, fake news. Don't go to CNN. And I was like, wait a minute. Having Fox News and CNN is the beauty of democracy and freedom of speech. That's the dream of us. If you want to shut down one of them and have only one TV channel, go to North Korea, go to Iran. We have one state controlled TV, and all we see bringing innocent protesters on TV and force them to do false confession. So your fight in America is democracy. It's democratic. In the West, it's democratic. At the end, you can prepare yourself for next election. We don't even have that. In the case of Venezuela, in the case of Iran, in the case of now many other countries, we don't have election. So that's why when it comes to have a common strategic plan against terrorists and dictators, I strongly believe that West are not seeing the true risk and danger. They're not as united as Russia, Putin, Khamenei, China, and other dictators. That really hurts the freedom fighters within the countries and everywhere.
Thank you. Actually, on that note, Leopoldo, what is your thoughts about how Western countries deal with this threat that Massey has outlined? The dictators are cooperating. They have so many tools. They have cyber warfare. They have surveillance tech at home. They abuse Interpol to try to arrest people, like many Russians try to get arrested by Interpol and other things. Does the West understand the threat? Do you see appeasement? What do you see from Western response to transnational repression? What should they be doing?
Well, we have seen appeasement. We have seen appeasement for years. We do get some statements of concern. We do get some slaps in the back saying we are with you, but that's not enough. And that is why we created the World Liberty Congress. It's the exact reason why we understood that if we don't stand together, our fight for freedom will not be as strong as it needs to be. Because of a simple idea that was crafted here, that human rights are universal, that all women and all men are created equal. What does that mean? That means that there are no borders. That means that there is a violation of human rights in Iran and I am in Venezuela. It needs to be as important. And that's why we united voices, dissidents, leaders, movements, women, men, people who are in exile, people who are in their own countries, understanding that it doesn't matter if you're in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, in Latin America, or in Asia, the fight is the same. And let me tell you something. For us, it has been a growing human experience to meet so many courageous women and men that we are very different. Our religion is different. Our skin color is different. Our history is different. Our languages are different. And if we talk about any other topic, we could be very different people. When we speak about what it means to fight an autocratic regimes, immediately we are part of the same movement. Immediately we become brothers and sisters, and we don't use this term brothers and sisters lightly. We use this term because we believe that we need to have true solidarity, and we need to understand. And one of the challenges that we have, and we have taken that personally, is to learn. To learn what is happening in other countries. So places like this, when we hear voices from Vietnam, from North Korea, from Zimbabwe, from Venezuela, from Iran, these are places where we learn. And it's not just to learn the facts, it's also to learn the empathy that is necessary to understand that simple idea that human rights are universal. That should be the commitment of the Human Rights Council. But unfortunately, it is not. Not because of the people that are doing the reports are not doing their work. Because I need to make the distinction.
My brother always tried to make me politically correct because I, criticize United Nations. But this is a fact, and that's true. But at the end, it's endless meeting.
Well, but we need to make the distinction because there are many courageous women and men that belong to the human rights system, that go to our countries, take risks, that make sure that truth is told, that crimes are reported. They do the job. They do the job. And I have seen them. I know them. I've spoken with them. Well, let me tell you something. They are as frustrated as we are when nothing happens. They come here year after year, present the reports, and then politics takes over and nothing happens. So what do we need? We need the democratic countries to stand together, to understand that the fight for democracy and freedom and human rights is a vital fight. And it is not just a fight for more statements and for more speeches.
I think we need an alternative United Nations. Because to be honest, that's why my brother mentioned that. Thank you. My brother mentioned that we are different. We have different political views. We have different culture, different background, coming from different geography. But we are united. We stand together when it comes to fight together against tyranny, against dictatorship. All of us, many of us, we know each other through UN Watch, through Oslo Freedom Forum, through organizations that bring all the dissidents together. We are changing the narrative in the world. If those who are working for United Nations and they are frustrated, Now they have to stand up against Antonio Guterres. They have to speak up. They have to say that they are frustrated. Because look, they spend hours and hours and they talk to the victims, and the victims inside Iran, they risk everything to share everything with the United Nations. And at the end, it's just a statement. Endless and useless meetings and statements. And that hurts the victims, that kills the hope of victims. Even now, I am shy to go to the victims and tell them that come and work with the United Nations, while the United Nations give a seat to the Islamic Republic to monitor human rights globally right after a massacre. That's why I believe that we need to build up a movement, an action-oriented movement that actually take charge and educate the youth in the West. Because look, I'm going to be very honest with you. It breaks my heart when some of like you in the West saying that, okay, this is in Zimbabwe, this is in Venezuela, this is in Hong Kong, this is in Iran. Why should we care about something happen miles away from Europe, Geneva, Netherlands? Yes? Whether you care about what's happening in Iran, in Venezuela, Russia, China, or not, those dictators, they really care about you. Some in the right wing say in America say that America is first. We should just focus on America. They're wrong, because for dictators, America is first too. The first target to destruction. And for those left who sympathize with the Islamic Republic, they don't know that the Islamic Republic is not only targeting the women in Iran, or the Taliban is not just targeting women in Afghanistan. It's in their DNA to expand Islamism everywhere. So if you don't join us, believe me, sooner or later, you will face all these dictators in front of your door, your house. So dictators are coming to you. So you better choose your allies. Us, freedom fighters that you're going to listen, Maria Corina Machado, or you choose Maduro and you cry for Maduro being captured. Oh, this is against international law. Capturing Maduro was the duty of international court, international law. They didn't do their job.
I mean, so to speak about the frustration, I can feel the frustration of the people of Iran when the day that they celebrated the Islamic Republic revolution, they got a congratulations message from the Secretary General of the UN. How do you think?
Condemnation, not a condemnation for the massacre, but congratulations for the regime.
And what did we get from the UN Secretary General when Maduro was captured? Deep concern. Deep concern. That's what we got. So, of course, there is frustration. Of course, the UN system needs to be revised and needs to be reformed because it's not functioning. It's not functioning for what it's meant to be, for the people, for these ideas that we believe in, universal human rights. So I congratulate this meeting, congratulate this summit, because this is unusual. It's unusual to come to Geneva and to have people like us to speak out, because many times they tell us you need to be politically correct. You need to be polite to the international law. You need to work within the diplomatic ways of saying things. But if we work with the diplomatic ways of saying things, we won't be heard, because nobody's being heard when those words are being spoken in those terms. So yes, you hear today frustration, but you also hear hope, because we are about hope. We are not about frustration. We are about hope. And let me tell you why. Because the people in Iran, in Venezuela, in most African countries, in most Asian countries, they want to be free. They want to be free. So this is not about Western values. This is about the essence of human beings who want to be free. And what we need to do is to bring together not just the dissidents, not just the movements, but also governments, media, organizations, human rights organizations. We need to bring everyone to this idea that the world could be a world respectful of human rights. And human rights, my friends, does not come alone. Human rights is a consequence of two other things. In order to have human rights, there needs to be democracy. In order to have democracy, there needs to be free and fair elections. that will lead us to a free society. And only in a free society there can be respect for human rights.
Um, I just want to reinforce, you mentioned about when you spoke at the UN not being politically correct. Certainly, when the two of you and the other dissidents were there yesterday in the United Nations when we had our opening session, one of the diplomats told me, he said, I don't normally hear speeches like this. It's very different. Because normally either you hear very boring things or you hear politically correct things. And here you actually heard from people who have come from dictatorships who are in very close touch with the victims and speaking with passion and with genuine feeling and truth, and they weren't used to it. So it was very important that the two of you and the other dissidents spoke at the UN. And I'll just mention something else that the two of you have referenced, is that often at the UN, the dictators say, wait, don't tell us what to do in Iran or in Latin America or in Asia. You have your culture, that's Western culture. We have our culture, right? And that's the dictators who say that. They don't want universal human rights. They don't want protections. But of course, when you hear from the dissidents say, we do want universal human rights. We do want freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and so forth. So that is one of the big propaganda
Good
at the UN.
question. Very good question. But my brother, let's be very clear. I don't want to criticize dictators for saying this is our culture, because we know dictators, they lies. My problem is with those who buy these lies. The Europeans, for years and years, they bought these lies and saying that, when we go to Iran, we have to respect their culture. Really? Forcing 7-year-old girl cover from top to the toe in order to get an education is the culture of Iranian people? This is an insult to the entire nation, because this is the culture of ISIS. This is the culture of Taliban. They say that, people in Iran, in the Middle East, in authoritarian regimes, they don't deserve democracy. So maybe they don't say deserve. They say that they don't want democracy. This is not their culture. No, we want democracy. And we deserve to have secular democracy and sit together like this. Sitting here, speaking is a crime in my country. You get bullets in your head, in your chest, if you speak up. And you think that this is our culture? Or suddenly we want to die. I mean, as a woman, we want to get raped because this is our culture. This is really an insult to a nation. So I don't criticize the dictators, but I call on Europeans, on democratic countries, to respect nation with empty hands, stand up and say that our culture is tolerance. Our culture is not death to America, death to Israel. Our culture is we want to normalize having relation with America, with Israel, with all over the world. Our culture is not I am Hamas. No. Our culture is Hamas, Houthi, Islamic Republic. They are the biggest terrorist organization against people of Iran, people of Palestine, people of Gaza, people of Israel. This is our culture. Middle East is the most beautiful culture. Before Islamic Republic, we don't even share border with Israel. We had good relation with the Israeli government. This is not our culture to hate Israeli government. This is not our culture to hate America. We love you, good people. We love you. I was brainwashed. In my country, they were telling me that you have to shout death to America and Israel as loud as Tel Aviv and White House would shake. Guess what? This is Iranians now. They shout as loud as Ali Khamenei's house is shaking now. Death to Islamic Republic. This is our culture, because our culture is all about love, dancing, music, history, culture. But their culture, the Islamic Republic culture, is death, sending weapons, sending assassins in front of your house, sending killers, rapists, expanding Islamic ideology everywhere. This is their culture. So then it's your choice. You have choice. You want to choose the culture of ISIS, Taliban, and Islamic Republic, Hamas, Houthi, Hezbollah, or the culture of the beautiful Middle East who wants to stand together and be a normal country, have normal relation with all of you. Choose us. You don't have two options. You have only one option. Yes, because in the West, I'm going to last sentence. Unfortunately, you cannot ask me to be politically correct. Unfortunately, some in the West, they are allergic to the word regime change. But hey, we have allergy to dictators. So it's very simple. Join us. This is the Berlin Wall moment of Venezuela, Iran. Please join us to bring the wall of dictatorship down. The consequence is going to be bigger than the fall of the Berlin Wall because we're going to have peace and global security without the autocracy ink. Together, we are stronger. Thank you so much.
Leo, final thoughts, 30 seconds.
I just join a global movement for freedom. We offer you the World Liberty Congress, but you also have the Geneva Summit. Just join. Understand that alone we cannot win this fight. Understand that we need to learn about what's happening in other parts of the world. And I think that's the biggest takeaway of this summit. Let's join efforts. Let's be courageous. And one final thought: they cannot change us as human beings. We are good people. They cannot change us when we want to smile. We need to smile. They cannot take away from us our optimism. They cannot make us be people who are resentful and bad and in a bad mood all the time. We want to fight this fight with optimism, with hope, and with the assurance that we will be free. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Leopoldo. Before we break, before we break, I want to remind people we're going to break in a moment for lunch. The event will resume at 2:30 p.m. I want to thank Masi Alinejad, Leopoldo Lopez for your contributions, which underscore the theme of today's Geneva Summit: unite against tyranny and rise for freedom. Thank you very much.
do. Let the flow on, baby. Let's do the things together only lovers do. Let the flow on, baby.
to work together. Well, frankly, I think it's time for us to also learn to work together, to cooperate across borders. And the Geneva Summit for Human Rights offers an amazingly important platform to look into each other's eyes and to find ways to consign these dictatorships into the dustbin of history.
Dear friends, a few months ago, my children hugged their father again. For years, they had only memories. There was no communication, letters didn't arrive, and we didn't know if he was alive. And then, after 5 years as a hostage of the Belarusian regime, he walked free. My name is Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and I am not a politician by a choice. I am a wife, I am a mother, and I am Belarusian who just wanted to live normally. 6 years ago, my husband, Sergei Tikhanovsky, was a blogger. He traveled across Belarus with his camera, asking ordinary people simple question: how do you live? People told him about empty factories, about salaries that cannot feed a family, about fear, about the problems of normal life. For that, he was arrested. I remember the moment when I learned he wouldn't come home. I remember holding my phone, reading the message over and over again. Arrested, again, then charged, then sentenced to 19.5 years in prison. 19.5 years. My children were very small. They asked me, Mama, when will Papa come back? What do you answer? Do you tell them the truth? That in Belarus, telling the truth is a crime? Or do you protect their childhood for one more day? I decided that if my husband was imprisoned for speaking, then I would speak louder. I registered as the presidential candidate in his place, not because I was brave, but because I was angry, because I was heartbroken, because I couldn't explain to my children why we did nothing. I traveled across Belarus and I saw hope in people's eyes. I saw grandmothers standing in long lines under the sun just to sign our petition. I saw workers, teachers, students whispering, "We are with you." Tens of thousands came to our rallies. It became a popular movement for change. We are reborn, red one banner. And then came the election of 2020. Belarusians voted for change. They voted for me, and we won. We all know it, and the regime knows it. That night, the internet was shut down. Peaceful protesters were beaten. Women were dragged by their hair. Teenagers were tortured in prison cells. I remember one woman who told me how she stood in the detention center corridor and heard men screaming while police laughed. She said the sound will never leave her. And this is not politics. This is cruelty. And soon after, I was forced into exile. I had 15 minutes to decide, prison or live in my country to continue the fight from abroad. I left. You know, the hardest moment of my life was not crossing the border. It was knowing that my children would grow up away from their home and without their father. Knowing that our family would be scattered because one man refuses to give up power. And it wasn't just about our family. Today, there are more than 1,200 political prisoners in Belarus. teachers, journalists, students, pensioners. People like Mykolai Statkevich, who refused to be forcibly deported and is now held incommunicado. Like journalist Katerina Andreeva, who was arrested while reporting from the 2020 protests. Like Belarusian Polish activist and journalist Andrzej Poczobut, who was awarded the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought by the European Parliament last year. Imagine living with one of your relatives in prison. Every morning you wake up and check the news, hoping not to see your loved one name in the list of the dead. And this is the daily life of Belarusian families. And while Belarus suffers under dictatorship, our land is also being used as a launchpad for Russia's war aggression against Ukraine. I want to say clearly, Belarusians stand with Ukraine. Our people sabotaged railways to stop Russian tanks. Our volunteers fight alongside Ukrainians because we know that we are in this fight together. While political prisoners in Belarus are tortured with freezing temperatures, ordinary Ukrainians are suffering because Russia is weaponizing the winter cold. The fate of Belarus and Ukraine is intertwined. If Belarus becomes free, Ukraine will be safer. If Ukraine wins, Belarus will have a chance. This is why our struggle matters not only to us. But I'm here not only to tell you a sad story, I'm here to ask you to act. When you leave this room, you will return to your offices, parliaments, newsrooms, and you have power, so use it. Don't normalize the regime. They have been deceiving you for the last 30 years. You cannot trust them. Do not trade principles for convenience. Do not forget the names of our hostages. Demand the unconditional release of all political prisoners. Strengthen sanctions against those who torture and imprison. Support Belarusian civil society, the independent journalists, the human rights defenders, the activists in exile and underground in Belarus. Help the families of prisoners. Help the children who grew up without their fathers and mothers. And hold the regime accountable. Impunity breeds more violence. Silence gives permission. I often think about the day I will be able to return to Minsk with my children. I imagine a Belarus where no one is imprisoned for asking, how do you live? This is not a dream too big. This is a normal European country. Belarusians have shown incredible courage. They marched peacefully. They endure tortures. They continue to resist. But courage alone is not enough. We need solidarity. We need you. And one day, when Belarus is free, we will remember those who stood with us, not only in our darkest times, but until the very end. Stand with Belarus. Stand with Ukraine. Stand with freedom. Thank you.
Que viva. Que viva Venezuela libre, claro que sí. Good afternoon. On January 3, U.S. military forces seized Venezuelan narco-terrorist Nicolás Maduro and flew him to New York to face federal charges. Broadcasters around the world asked, is this the beginning of the end of his authoritarian regime? And my answer is yes. I believe Venezuela will become a free and democratic country soon. But that future did not begin with Maduro's capture. It really began on July 28, 2024, when the people of Venezuela overwhelmingly voted against him. When 70% of Venezuelans said yes to Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo González Urrutia, yes to democracy, and yes to freedom. It began even earlier when Maria Corina won the primary election in 2023 with more than 93% of the votes. I was part of those campaigns. But I couldn't celebrate the victory of July 28 because that night I was locked inside the Argentine embassy in Caracas. I was a hostage. I was 8 years old when Hugo Chavez became president. I remember my family went silent that day. They knew that Chavez would use democracy to destroy democracy. But if Chavez achieved one thing, it's that he got Venezuelans' interest in politics. In 2007, in my first year at university, I watched millions of young Venezuelans mobilize against his constitutional reform and win. I was part of that. Politics became an act of self-defense against authoritarianism, and still. I met Maria Corina Machado shortly after Chavez died in 2013 during the opposition campaign. Maduro stole that election. A few weeks later, Maria Corina called me after being a volunteer, and she asked me to join her new political party, Vente Venezuela. I quit my job that day and started immediately. Over the next 10 years, I went from being the youngest and least experienced person in the room to director of international relations for Maria Corina Machado's presidential campaign. It felt like a full circle moment because when I met her 12 years ago, she had that role that I had in that moment. So no, I did. As an international coordinator, I traveled constantly, and every time I went to the airport, I knew they might arrest me. My colleagues used to say, in a dictatorship, everyone has a number. One day, they are gonna call your number. They called mine on December 6, 2023. Maria Corina had just won the primary election. I was in the middle of a press conference when my watch started vibrating. They are coming for you, run. I got into a car with my colleagues, Claudia and Henry, and we sped to a nearby embassy. The ambassador accepted us and tried to put us at ease for a couple of hours. He asked how long we expected to stay. This won't take long, I thought. It was 2 weeks. I had heard about this happening to other people, but it's very different when you are the main character in the story. The first thing you learn is that this is real. They could put you in jail if they wanted. It doesn't matter what the truth is. You will never see an arrest warrant. All that matters is what they say. And they said I was a terrorist, I was a conspirator, and a traitor. We stayed silent, and on December 20, 2023, they released us in a prisoner exchange. But that was the beginning. We were not free. They had canceled our passports and frozen our bank accounts. I had to report to a judge every 2 weeks, like so many others. But as I mentioned, that was just the beginning. Next January, the regime officially disqualified Maria Corina from running for president. There was no trial, no evidence, and no due process. It was a political ban, not a legal one. She was simply a big threat to Maduro. After that, the regime started targeting our campaign leaders one by one. What was our crime? Managing a campaign and winning an election. Maria Corina decided to keep fighting to defend the people's mandate in the primaries. Then, on March 20, 2024, I was at the office when a new press conference announced that they were issuing another arrest warrant for me and 10 of my colleagues. 2 of them, Henry and Ignora, were abducted by the political police. The rest of us had to run. I raced to the Argentine embassy. During the afternoon, more arrived. Magali, the head of the campaign, Claudia, the communications coordinator, Humberto, the election coordinator, Omar, the political coordinator, Fernando, the alliances advisor, and me. I looked around and thought, well, we have everyone we need here. This is the new campaign office in the embassy. Time was running out. Maria Corina could not be a candidate. Neither could Corina Lloris, her second attempt. Finally, Ambassador Edmundo González Urrutia stepped up to be on the ballot. We knew the opportunity that was in front of us. They never expected us to keep campaigning from inside the embassy while Maria Corina and Edmundo were traveling around the country. But we did, because it was a survival decision, the only possible one. On election day, I remember standing on the embassy balcony overlooking Caracas. It was the first time I couldn't vote in my own country. That day, one of my missions was coordinating 64 international observers to visit the country. The regime deported every single one of them. But we had nearly 1 million Venezuelans volunteers at polling stations around the country. They collected the tally sheets, scanned them, and uploaded them to the cloud. We made history. That night, the regime declared Maduro the winner. But we knew the truth. We won by a landslide. After that, everything changed. Maria Corina had to go into hiding. Edmundo González was forced into exile. The regime was ready to attack anyone connected to the campaign before, during, or after the election. People were sent to prison, forced into exile, or pushed into hiding. In simple but painful words, state terrorism. We were still stuck inside the embassy. Over the next 10 months, they did everything they could to break us and force us to surrender. They cut off the electricity and water completely. We spent 5 months without power, depending on a solar panel. 5 months without running water. We drank water from the ambassador's pool in the worst unhealthy conditions. Without refrigeration, or food rotted. We rationed everything and sometimes ate only once a day. And our neighbors were those who you never expected to have, the embassies of Russia and North Korea. I remember gathering as a group to discuss possible scenarios in that moment. Maybe the regime will allow some of us to leave, but who would stay and who would go? We decided sometimes that I always remember very proudly. No one leaves unless everyone leaves. Then, in December, 9 months in, we realized that they had turned the neighbor house into a police surveillance post with masked men pointing assault rifles straight at us. This was no longer an embassy. It was a diplomatic prison. And I realized that dying was a real possibility. Of course, I couldn't sleep. I was terrified. We all were, knowing that at any minute, the regime could storm the embassy and take us to prison or worse. But we decided to resist, and fear became our engine. We were free in mind and spirit. In those final months, our only source of hope was the wild macaws, or guacamayas, wild parrots that flying overhead in Caracas. They started coming down to visit us. They would sit on our shoulders and our arms. At first, they were a symbol of trust and freedom. And then, in May 2025, more than 400 days after we had arrived to that embassy, they felt like a signal from the universe that it was time to fly. We had already planned to escape twice with no success. But the regime made one massive error. They had cut the electricity to our building, and that meant their security cameras were off too. We figured out where the blind spots were and made our escape. They discovered it 4 days later. After we were safe, we learned the regime had been building a tunnel underground to extract us, to make us disappear or kill us. But our escape proved that the regime is not perfect. They are divided. There are people inside Maduro's system fighting for democracy in secret. Without their help and without the international support, we would not have escaped. I want to especially thank the US government for their leadership in our rescue and all the courageous people that risked their lives to help us, including the Argentine government that protected us. I don't like to think about what would happen if we stayed in that embassy much longer. But international law is supposed to protect people like us. It should not be a shield for governments to attack their own people. Diplomacy and international law are not useless, but their rules have not been effective in confronting criminal authoritarian regimes. What do you tell survivors who are hiding in an embassy because they are supposed to be protected, but no one is actually protecting them? What happens when, before the eyes of the world, an embassy becomes a prison? What do you tell the political prisoners' families who are waiting for the international community to do something in the midst of despair? Why do we keep arriving too late? What is diplomacy for if it's not used to stand up to injustice? Today, I'm forced into exile like many others. So I understand something very clearly. You are never truly free until your country is free. The threats against you are permanent, but you keep fighting for those who cannot do it. And we have a mantra: no one is left behind. That's why we are working harder than ever, because Maduro is gone, but Venezuela is not liberated yet. There are still nearly 800 political prisoners in jail and 30 million Venezuelans inside and outside the country getting ready for the final day of liberation. As I was writing this speech, two of my colleagues I mentioned earlier, Henry and Dignora, were released after nearly 2 years in prison. But today I want to take a moment to recognize the brave Venezuelan people, to recognize my colleagues, and to recognize every exile and political prisoner who has been released, and those who are still in jail, as well as their families, especially those who are today, as we speak, on hunger strike in Zona 7 in Caracas, demanding freedom. Today, I call for the total, immediate, and unconditional release of all political prisoners, civilian and militaries, because there is no transition with repression. And I want to be clear on this idea. There is no transition with repression. It's not possible to talk about transition with repression. It is the brave Venezuelan people who give me hope for the future of Venezuela. I trust them. We trust each other. And that is why I will keep fighting until the very end. Hasta el final. Venezuela será libre. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. Thank you. Viva Venezuela libre. Libertad. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I speak as someone whose life has been shaped by discrimination, neglection, and exclusion. Coming from Rojava, Western Kurdistan, what some people call northeastern Syria, the Kurds' right to live in dignity under self-governance or independence doesn't come only from the sacrifices we made fighting global jihad or ISIS, the Islamic State. We deserve dignity because we are rooted in our homeland in the Middle East. Dignity is not something earned through war. It's something every people inherently deserves. We built self-defense not for power, we built it for survival and paid one of the highest prices. I started covering front lines of the war against ISIS in 2014 when I was working for a Kurdish TV station. I was just 21 years old when I documented mass graves committed by ISIS, bombing attacks prepared and sent to our cities by the current jihadi regime in Syria, which was back then called Al-Nusra Front. I have documented stories of slavery, abductions, and sale of women and young girls as sex slaves, and the unforgettable genocide against the Yazidi Kurds in Sinjar Mountain, named in Kurdish as Chiaye Shingali. I saw thousands of displaced families fleeing with nothing but their children in their arms, some mothers holding the dead bodies of their babies to their chests. In that moment, I remember tears pouring from my eyes, just as sweat poured from my skin on that hot summer day in August 2014. I saw what jihadis do when they believe is no one watching, but I was watching. Then after 4 months of that, ISIS took me hostage and threw me into an underground prison. For 280 days, in 7 different prisons, and 100 days of solitary confinement, I lived inside the system I had been reporting on. I saw how they operate from the inside, how they weaponize religion, erase identity, reward obedience, and punish difference. I saw how cruelty is normalized and how fear is organized. I cannot even begin to count the number of times our captors would blindfold us, line us up, and act like they were going to kill us, and then not. One of the times, a jihadi from Libya held a pistol right next to my head and pulled the trigger. The shot was so loud that for a moment I thought it was really the end. But seconds later, they were laughing. That was their sense of humor. Mocking us by playing their favorite execution scene. It was a psychological torture. It was a game to them. I survived those 9 months in captivity and got liberated thanks to the brave Kurdish female and male fighters of the defense units, the same who fought ISIS and liberate the region from the jihadi ghost. But many with me didn't survive. When I was finally released, I promised myself that I would dedicate my life to defending minority groups, because I had seen what happens when the world decides some lives are negotiable, and how West's normalization of extremism today with the jihadi failed de facto government in Syria is creating devastating consequences for us. In December 2024, when the dictator Assad left power, the Western world was so relieved, they said, finally, the brutal dictator is gone. Now, al-Jolani will bring stability to the region. What a naive fantasy. For decades, we have been brutally attacked on 2 fronts. On one side, by the government, Assad, and the other side by the religious extremists, jihadis like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Nusra, and so on, from different jihadi factions supported by Turkey and Qatar. So where does Jolani come from? This new leader who will bring stability to the region? He falls into the second category. He's a Salafi extremist. He comes from Al-Qaeda, then he built the Islamic Caliphate in Syria with a direct mandate from al-Baghdadi, who had already back then established it in Iraq. And after he moved to Syria, he built Al-Nusra Front, then Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, then Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known as HTS. All these mentioned factions are jihadi Salafi terror groups. I have spent years of my youth tracking these factions and know their past very well. Jolani is not a mystery to us, or to the West, or to the UN. The US State Department had a $10 million bounty on his head. And by the way, they still didn't delete the social media posts regarding that bounty. But Jolani's extremism did not disappear with his new suit and colorful tie. All that changed is his uniform, and maybe his beard style is a bit shorter, maybe 2 centimeters shorter than before. He wants to hear. I saw and I still see to this day how he deceives journalists and diplomats with his sugar-coated speeches and statements, while on the ground we witness something else, completely the opposite. Committing horrific massacres in less than 1 year. 3 horrific massacres targeting Christians, Kurds, killing more than 8,000 people and arresting other thousands of them. He's issuing performative presidential decrees, beautiful on paper, but meaningless in real life. Ink on paper that doesn't protect a single minority life. This is not a reform. This is a wolf in sheep's clothing. In the last months, I have watched with huge frustration as Western leaders who speak eloquently about democracy and human rights shake hands with these extremists. A former German Minister of Defense, now holding a senior position at the European Union, recently met with Jolani. This was right after that Jolani started a military campaign against the Kurds. She promised him 620 million euros without any clear public enforceable conditions at all. When I watched the news, I felt like she was rewarding him for all the massacres he commits. These officials who legitimize jihadi-linked leaders in the name of stability are not choosing justice and peace. They are choosing an illusion of short-term convenience. You cannot fight extremism by empowering its architects, and you cannot promote democracy while ignoring minority rights. Minorities are not a side issue. They are an early warning system of every failing state. I have seen this in my own life. 14 years ago, as a high school student, an administrator threatened to expel me simply because of speaking Kurdish to a friend. Not shouting, not protesting, just speaking my own language. As I said, this kind of discrimination is an early warning system. It was only 1 year later that 5,000 Kurds were massacred. We didn't feel safe under the rule of dictator Assad, but today we are suffering a worse de facto regime. And the West believes that we should integrate with these militant extremists. They push us to sign fragile agreements to avoid danger, fragile agreements with jihadis who practice taqiyya, concealing their beliefs to avoid danger till they gain more power and find the right moment to attack the non-believers. The non-believers like you all sitting here in this room. Sorry to say, but this is how they see us. This is how jihadis look to the outside world. It makes no sense to integrate with a jihadi failed state known as Syria. The Kurdish people are liberal, democratic, and openly anti-jihadist. We want to live free from religious coercion, free from violence, free from fear. And that's what we deserve, not just because we fought against ISIS and liberated huge territories from terror, but because we have the right like anyone else. We carry the voices of all minorities who refuse extremism. Until Druze, Jews, Alawites, Christians, Yazidis, Assyrians, and other minorities can live in safety, dignity, and equality, the entire region will remain unstable. We do not ask for pity.